Have you ever felt trapped in a small world, wishing for something bigger? I did. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how I learned English, one word at a time, and changed my life forever. I grew up in a quiet village where no one spoke English. The people were kind, the fields were green, and life felt simple, until the day an old storyteller visited. She stood under the banyan tree, surrounded by villagers, and told a story about a girl who learned English, traveled to far-off places, and saw wonders we couldn't even imagine. My heart pounded. I could see myself in that story. A little voice in my head whispered, "Emma, you can be that girl." But then another voice laughed. "How? You're just a village girl." I shook it off. That night, I lay awake under the stars. The storyteller had lit a fire inside me. I had to learn English. The next day, I ran to my teacher, Mrs. Lee. She was one of the few in the village who spoke English. "Mrs. Lee," I blurted out, "I want to learn English. I want to see the world." Her eyes softened. "Emma, learning English is like planting a seed. You must water it every day. Will you promise to work hard?" I nodded so fast my hair flew. That afternoon, we started. The first word I learned was hello. I practiced it 100 times, to my friends, to my goats, even to my reflection in the water. But learning English wasn't easy. One day I sat under the same banyan tree, tears dripping onto my notebook. The words dog, apple, sun felt like mountains I couldn't climb. "Why is this so hard?" I cried out loud. Mrs. Lee found me there and said something I'll never forget. "Emma, learning English is like crossing a river. At first the water is deep and your feet will slip on the rocks, but step by step, you'll get stronger." I wiped my tears and decided, I won't give up. A few weeks later, Mrs. Lee gave me an old, worn book. "This is Anne of Green Gables," she said. "Anne is just like you, a girl with big dreams." I looked at the pages. The words were like little strangers staring back at me. I didn't understand much, but I held that book tight, as if it were a treasure. At night, by the faint light of a lantern, I read aloud. I stumbled, stopped, and read again. When Anne said, "I'm so glad I live in a world where there are Octobers," I smiled. It felt like Anne was talking to me, encouraging me not to give up. Reading Anne's story taught me a lesson. Every word is like a friend. Meet them one at a time, and soon, they will feel like family. One day, I decided to practice my English with the village shopkeeper. I stood tall and said, "Good evening. I want 2 breads." The shopkeeper stared at me. "2 breads? What is that?" The people around us started to laugh. My face burned red and I ran all the way home. I wanted to hide forever. That night, Mrs. Lee told me something important. "Emma, mistakes are like stepping stones. The more you step on them, the closer you get to your goal." I realized something then. To learn English, I had to be brave enough to make mistakes. The next day I went back to the shopkeeper. This time I smiled and said, "I want 2 loaves of bread, please." He grinned. "Much better, Emma." I learned that mistakes aren't failures. They're part of the journey. Over time, English became a friend. I could read simple stories, write little sentences, and even help others. One afternoon, I sat under the banyan tree with a group of children. I opened Anne of Green Gables and began reading aloud. "Anne's red hair was the color of fire," I said. The children giggled and listened with wide eyes. For the first time, I wasn't just learning, I was teaching. I realized something magical. When you share what you learn, your words grow stronger. Years passed, and Mrs. Lee gave me exciting news. "Emma, there is a scholarship. If you win, you can study abroad. I spent weeks preparing for the test. I practiced day and night, whispering sentences to the stars above me. Finally, the results came. My name was on the list. I hugged Mrs. Lee and cried. My dream, the one I thought was impossible, was coming true. When I arrived in the new country, I felt like a little bird who had left its nest for the first time. Everything was strange. The streets, the food, the way people spoke so quickly. One day in class, I answered a question. My voice shook and the students giggled. I felt small again, but that night, I thought of Anne. She never let fear stop her, so I practiced harder. I listened, I spoke, and I tried again. Slowly, the laughter stopped, and my confidence grew. I learned something powerful. Learning English is like growing a garden. It takes time, care, and patience. But when the flowers bloom, they are beautiful. Years later, I returned to my village, not as a student, but as a teacher. The children gathered around me, just like I had once gathered to hear stories. "Who wants to learn English?" I asked. Their hands shot up, and I smiled. I knew then that my story, the story of a girl who dared to dream, was just beginning. If you feel like English is a mountain you can't climb, remember this. Each word is a friend waiting to be known. Every mistake is a stepping stone. Learning is a garden that blooms with patience. If a girl from a small village can learn English and see the world, so can you. Have you ever dreamed of learning something new? Share your dream in the comments below. And remember, every journey starts with a single word. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me for more inspiring stories.